Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this month's free family NatureSketch Workshop. My name is Val Lawton, and I am a published children's illustrator and author and a wildlife artist. And I'll be your host and guide today as we learn about the bald eagle. I just wanted to say a few words about here at the Bateman Foundation, where we're currently sitting. We're looking out over the Inner Harbour here in downtown Victoria, and the Bateman Foundation is located on the traditional territories of the Lekwungen and Esquimalt and Songhees communities. So we're very grateful for that. Here at the Bateman Foundation, we believe that nature is magic, and we foster and encourage deepening connections between people and their natural surroundings. The more you get to know something, the more you get to care about it. So NatureSketch aims to encourage us to get out into nature and to deepen our relationships with plants and animals around them. So welcome to today's session. This is a preview for next month's NatureSketch program, and that session is going to be called, that 4-week session is going to be called Raptors Amongst Us. And we'll be studying a number of raptors, including the bald eagle. This is just a taste of what we'll be looking at. We're going to be looking at the bald eagle, the peregrine falcon, and the osprey. So that is what this is a preview of. And today we're going to do just do a portrait of a bald eagle to get you going. So if you'd like to stick around towards the end of our session today, we're going to be live for 1 hour. You will be getting a code, and that code can be used as a discount on next month's sessions should you care to sign up. Let's get us started. I have a little poem that I'd like you to have a look at. I like to start off my sessions with a little poem, and this one is by Alfred Lord Tennyson. He was an English poet, and he was the poet laureate during much of Queen Victoria's reign. And this is about the eagle. It's not specifically the bald eagle, about an eagle, and I thought it was particularly appropriate for our creature of the hour, which is the bald eagle. He clasps the crag with crooked hands, close to the sun in lonely lands. Ringed with azure world he stands. The wrinkled sea beneath him crawls. He watched from his mountain walls, and like a thunderbolt he falls. That is a wonderful image of a bald eagle diving towards the ocean looking for his prey. So let's take a look at our next screen here. Just a little bit about the bald eagle. The scientific name is Haliaeetus leucocephalus. So that is a series of 4 Greek root words which all together mean white-headed sea eagle. So Hali stands for salt, aetus means eagle, leuco means white, and cephalus means head. So as I say, all together, put those words all together and you get the white-headed sea eagle. The word bald, we call it the bald eagle. Of course, he's not really bald. He's got feathers on the top of his head. But bald comes from the Old English word meaning piebald, from piebald, which meant white-headed rather than hairless. So let's get the camera on me just for a few seconds so you can see who's talking to you for the next hour or so. And my man behind the screen is Duncan, who is our genius with all things technical and technological and computer related. So thank you very much for being here and helping me out, Duncan.
Anytime.
So the bird of prey we're talking about today, the bald eagle, he's found generally near large bodies of water and with an abundant food supply and old growth trees for nesting. So we'll get to us looking at some pictures by Bob Bateman very shortly. We know that he's an opportunistic feeder, and he subsists mainly on fish, which it swoops down and snatches from the water with its talons, and it also builds the largest nest of any North American bird, which I think is really quite fascinating. Some of the largest tree nests ever recorded for any animal species. As I say, he's not actually bald. He is white-headed. The adult male, both male and female, is mainly brown with a white head and tail, and they're basically identical in plumage, the sexes are. But the females are usually 25% larger, which is an interesting statistic. The beak is yellow, large, and hooked, and the plumage of the immature bald eagle is brown. So you can often see a bird overhead, and I'll look at that and wonder, now, is that a bald eagle, or is that another type of an eagle? Because it could be a juvenile bald eagle. So let's get started by looking at some Robert Bateman images. We've got here one that was done in the late 90s, I believe. It's called The Return, and it's the bald eagle pair. This is one that is, you'll notice with Robert Bateman's paintings, they're very, very frequently telling us about the ecosystem of the animal, not just the animal itself, but the environment that the animal lives in. So this is a lovely shot of a nesting pair. Obviously the female is sitting on her eggs here and the male is returning, perhaps with some sort of lunch, or maybe she's just giving her luncheon orders and he's off to pick them up. That's a beautiful shot, and you can see the size of the nest in this one. Here, Approach, Bald Eagle. This is I believe this is an acrylic painting, again by Robert Bateman. A beautiful technique, beautiful rendering of the feathers and fur, and obviously an adult bald eagle because he's got the white head. And you can see from this image just the size of those talons. They're quite large, and it makes me think back to that Lord Tennyson poem, but the size of those feet that hang down. You can see his talons are very much similar in shade, in color, to the beak. Here we have the weathered branch bald eagle. This is probably one of my favorites. The detail and the texture that Robert Bateman has created on the feathers on the back of this eagle is really quite remarkable. Absolutely beautiful one. Again, a very good examination of the environment that our bald eagle lives in. And there he is on a branch and could be looking at anything. Maybe he's spotting some prey down in the valley below. They have excellent eyesight, eyes like an eagle, it's very true. Here we are, another Call of the Wild. This is a brighter image, as you can see. The sky is much bluer. But again, we can really see the environment that our eagle is living in. Bald eagle flying. This is an older one. This is from the late 1980s, early 1991, I believe, early 1990s, and a classic example of our bird soaring, looking for prey, probably looking at something below. It got his eyes spotted on something. So that's a beautiful example of that as well. In the late 19th century, the bald eagle was on the brink of extirpation, meaning it was close to becoming extinct, and it has made its way back from that. We know that he is now no longer on the endangered species list, so that's a wonderful thing. And it is the creature of the United States. It's the national bird of the U.S. and it appears on the United States of America seal. So he's a very important creature, both at the sort of ecological level and to the nation of the United States. It was transferred to the threatened species list, so it is still a little bit endangered, but it's not as bad as it was back 10, 15, 20 years ago. So there is definitely hope for the bald eagle. Certainly in this part of the world here on Vancouver Island, we see them quite frequently. Taking another look at, this is quite a recent painting by Robert Bateman called Heritage, and this is again a classic looking at the environment that our bird is sitting in. He's upset about something. We get the sense he's upset, partly because of the feathers on the back of his neck are standing up. He's not happy. And is it perhaps because the tree that was once his nesting ground or her nesting ground, is it because that tree is now gone? That is the question that this painting poses to viewers of the image. So that is possibly what we're looking at here. So this is the image that I want us to draw today. This is the bald eagle portrait, again, by Robert Bateman. And I'm hoping that you all got this in the Keela email system. So we're going to use this as our example. Now, if any of you are having problems hearing me, please feel free to use the chat. And Duncan is going to be curating that on the other side of my computer here. So we're going to get started with this. I've got the bald eagle. This is in color. Of course, we are working with graphite, pencil. So I've intentionally removed the color from this image because we don't really need it. It might throw us off a little bit when it comes to understanding the tones and values that make up our eagle. So I have taken out the color and I've added what I call composite shapes. And this is what I mean by composite shapes. So I looked at this eagle, and everything in the world can be broken up into shapes. And when I look at this eagle, these are the shapes that kind of sprang to my mind. Now, when you look at the eagle, you may see very different shapes. So this is simply my rendering, my understanding of how I see this fellow broken down. You may well have a different one, but what I'm sharing with you today is what I understand. So if you want to go ahead and do this on another animal, do think about the shapes that make sense to you. We try to use shapes that are very standard shapes. Like in this case, we've got a circle, we've got a rectangle, we've got an oval, we've got another smaller circle for the eye, and then we have a triangle that overlays the beak. So those are the very basic shapes that I've used, and we will get started with drawing those. I'm now going to remove the eagle from the image, and there is what the composite shapes look like without any eagle in it. So can we see that screen okay, Duncan? Is that looking okay? Yeah. Oh, it's looking rather blue on my, let's get some light going on here.
Yeah, it's just the nature of our blue skies and
okay.
blue water today. We
think maybe we're getting some light from outside that's a little bit bluer than maybe should be. I'm hoping you're able to see me okay.
I'll try to drown it out.
So Duncan is going to drown it out with some really bright lighting overhead. We've got lots of natural light coming in, but maybe this will be a little bit better. We shall see. Anyway, let's take a look at our composite shapes. I'm going to have it on the screen here on your right. You've got the PowerPoint presentation on the right, and I've also got it right here just for you to take a closer look at. I'll be looking very closely at this image here while I'm working on creating my composite shapes. So let's have a go at that. There, that's a bit better. Thank you, Duncan. So I have taken these shapes and I have drawn them onto my piece of paper here. As you can see, if you can see really tightly, I've done it really, really lightly. I have drawn some very basic shapes on my page here. I'm going to go a little tighter to see if you can see them. Now there's a bit of a delay here for me, so I'm not sure how quickly you're able to see these. Let's see now. Oh, back up a bit. So I'm going to start drawing these shapes. The first one you see on the very first shape that I'd like you to draw is that oval, which represents the head. The oval, it's not quite a circle, though if you draw a circle, that will be fine too. But let's start with an oval. And I'm going to ask you to split that oval into 4 equal parts, as though it were sort of slightly oval-shaped pizza. I want you to do an X and a Y axis and go right through the head with an X and a Y axis. That is a horizontal axis and a vertical axis. Now, those will be lines that will help us understand where the facial features of our eagle reside. So I'm also going to ask if you can press quite lightly with the pencil you're using. Don't press too hard because you want to be able to erase these at some point. We want to be able to erase those. So let's get this up a little bit higher. I'm not sure that people can see my overhead screen very well, Duncan. Okay, so let's get in here, and I have started doing mine. I just had them sort of lightly outlined here so that I could go in when I had you on air and sort of darken them up a bit. I'm going to start with that oval shape. Is it upside down? I think it is. Sorry guys, I'm just fixing this shape of the screen here. I'm just going around and outlining the oval for my bald eagles, the composite shape that I've got for his head here. And I'm hoping that you're able to see what I'm doing, though I think it might be upside down for you, or sideways. We'll get that figured out in a second. So while we're figuring that out, just feel free to draw that oval and then split it into the 4 parts. Thank you, Duncan. He's a genius. Okay, so I've got my oval, and then I'm going to split it halfway, right down the middle. There's what we call the Y-axis, right down the middle, and then the X-axis is going to go right through horizontally through the middle. So that is my very first stab at my bald eagle. Okay, then right in the middle, you're going to have a smaller dot there, and that smaller dot represents, you guessed it, the eyeball. And that is actually the eye socket that our bird's eye sits in. It's not just the eyeball itself, but it's actually the socket of the eye. So let's draw a light circle right where the 2 axes meet, right on the top of it there. There we go. And then the next shape that I want to take a closer look at is the triangle. The triangle is the shape that I kind of saw being representing the beak. Now, you may think, well, that doesn't make sense, Val. Why did you have the beak like that? Well, I want one end of the composite shape to right at the tip of the beak, and the other end of the composite shape to be at the very top of the beak. So this is going to help us understand when it comes to actually filling in the space where there is beak. It will kind of help us understand how big how large that dimension is. And I also wanted it to overlap nicely with the circle or the oval for the head. So bear with me and you'll see what I mean. So let's go ahead and draw that triangle that I've got in here, and I'm doing it really lightly. Just nice and light, because we will want to erase these lines. Going in here, nice and light. And there is the area that we will be using for the bald eagle's beak. The next composite shape I'd like you to take a closer look at is this rectangle. And the rectangle represents like the neck and as it leads into the shoulder. So I'm going to draw that, and notice how it overlaps slightly with the oval. And it even incorporates a little bit of the y-axis. That's the axis that goes straight up and down. See, there's a little bit of that right inside that box. I'm going to outline that a little more lightly. And then up here and down to one side. There we go. And then the final shape is this shape here. This one here. And that represents the shoulder, and where we can see that beautiful texture of feathers overlapping one another, almost like shingles coming off a roof. So that's the shape we want to fill in the last. And it's going to come down around here. I've got it overlapping that rectangle about, maybe about 3/5 of or 2/5 of the way through our box. And it goes beyond the end of the rectangle. You see where it overlaps with the rectangle there? It's about 1/3 of the way down that side of the rectangle. And it doesn't need to be full circle because we can't see the full shoulder on our eagle in the image, the Bob Bateman painting. So we can't see the full shoulder here, but we'll certainly be able to work on some of those feathers. Okay, so we've now got our very basic shapes in here. Now the next step is to actually go in and fill in the form. So we've got our shapes here. The next step as artists is to create the form around those shapes. So let's take a closer look at this one, the next screen. And that is back to that image that you first saw. You can see now with your composite shapes in, where does the eagle live within those composite shapes? For much of that, like the oval, that oval is filled with eagle, but that triangle is not filled with beak. So let's go in and I'll show you exactly what I mean by that very sort of confusing comment I just made. But let's take a look at that. I'm going to use a slightly lighter pencil to get my form in, just because I want to be able to make some changes to it. And I'm hoping you're going to be able to see it. I go a little bit tighter here. Okay, so starting with our triangle here for the beak, let's take a look at where the beak, what the triangle means to this beak here. Remember I mentioned that left-hand corner of our triangle? That's where the very tip of the beak lives, right down here. So I want to start from that end here, and I'm going to take the edge of the beak. And this is outside of the composite shapes. This is almost like the positive shape outside of our composite shapes. There's where there is eagle outside of our shapes. It's a shape unto itself. So look at how we go from the tip of that triangle right up into the upper left-hand quadrant of our pizza, and you'll see it goes just slightly below our x-axis. So I want it to meet right up about here. I think it's going to meet up right about here with the oval that represents the head. Now remember, we know that the beak is going to start down here, and that might, if you had not been using composite shapes, you might have thought, no, I think that's too short. I think that's too short for my beak. But it really, the eagle doesn't really have that long a snout, if you like, or that long a beak. It's very, very curved. It's very dense. It's very powerful. And part of the power comes from the fact that it is stout. It's a very stout and strong beak. So keeping in mind that your very tip of your beak is going to go to this end of your composite shape. It's going to end here. I'm going to go from A to B here. I'm going to do a nice gentle curve. And if you don't get that curve exactly right the first time, don't worry about it. Take a few passes at it. I think it's going to go approximately like that. And it goes right up into the eagle's head. See that? You can even take that line a little bit further. I'm going to darken that a little bit so that I hope that you can see it nice and clearly. This working on YouTube is a little bit different than what we normally do. I know some of the people watching today are also in my classes, and we're delivering it today on a slightly different platform. So we do have some differences in how the images are being delivered to you. There's, as I mentioned, there's quite a delay in sound. Okay, so I've got that edge of my beak done in nicely. Let's take a closer look here again. So down here we've got our tip of our beak. He's right at the end of that composite shape of the triangle. Let's look at the bottom of the beak now, the very bottom edge of our beak. And it goes up about this far on our triangle. Let's take a look now. I think it's going to go right to about here, right to about there. And then it meets with that oval, the circle for the oval, right about here. Look at that. Point A, point B, just going to give that a nice gentle line. It's not a really hard and straight line. It is a slightly curved line. And that goes in a little further too. You can take that in a little further. In fact, you can see exactly how far that end of that beak line is going to go because you can take a look at where it lies inside the composite shape here. So it goes to right about here. I've now got the very basic shape of my beak. And it does have, right now it does have an interesting appearance to it. It looks a bit like a parrot with that line here. But that of course is not the lip line, if you like, for our bald eagle. That is a line that we're going to be removing shortly. Not quite yet, but shortly. Okay, so now we've got the shape of our beak in here. Let's take a look at where that nostril sits. That nostril is quite important. So that nostril, or nare, N-A-R-E, as the scientists say, sits right on this line here, doesn't it? And it sits within the boundaries of our triangle. So I'm going to do a light little line here for my nare, that nostril, and it overlaps. It goes right over top of that x-axis. And it doesn't touch the edge of our triangle. So I think it goes right about like that. I think it goes right about like that. There's going to be a little bit of a ridge outside it. If you want to get really detailed in your drawing, you can see there's a slight ridge just around the edge of it. We can get to that later too. That's a little bit of detail that you may want to add later. So going a little bit further now, let's take a look at the where the eye resides. As we know, that eyeball sits basically where the X and Y axis meet. So right there in the center. I'm going to go a little tighter and hope that you can see what I'm doing here, because I like to do the eye. I like to get the eye in place early on in my drawing, so I get kind of the personality of my creature figured out. It's always very helpful. Now remember, I said that this circle really represents the whole eye socket, not just the eyeball, but the socket itself that the eye sits in. So the eyeball itself is actually just a little bit smaller than the circle that I've drawn. Just take a look at that. Just taking a look at your reference image, you can see that the black area around the eye, where the eye sits inside the eye socket, and that's why it's dark, because that area is recessed. It's a bit further away from us. It is darker around the edges, and it doesn't completely fill that circle. So keep that in mind when you're drawing your eye, your round eye in there. You could actually draw the pupil in right away if you like. The pupil sits not quite right in the center between the two axes. It's slightly above it. It's sort of sitting right about there, I'm going to say. You can draw that pupil in first if you like. And here's a little trick I like to do. I think a lot of artists do this, though I haven't taken a survey or anything, but I think a lot of artists like to do this ahead of time. We know that that eye has a reflection on it, and that's the nature of the shape of the eye and the fact that it's damp or it's moist. So we're seeing the sun or the light reflected off that eye. So let's draw in that reflective area right now. So that is a little bit of shape here. Even with your pencil, you can kind of go over that in your mind a few times just to get the shape of that little kind of a little bit of a curve in here, little shape of that reflection. So I'm just going to draw that in right now overlaps a little bit on the pupil. I'm going to draw that in right now. So that tells me that I'm going to leave that white spot, I'm going to leave it white. I'm going to leave it the color of my sketchbook paper. I'm going to go in a little tighter yet and hope that you can still see what I'm doing here. As I say, there is a bit of a delay, so I'm not entirely sure if you're able to see quite yet. I'm just waiting for the YouTube to catch up here. So while I'm waiting, I'm going to go in with the tip of my pencil, and I've got it quite sharp right now. I'm going to go in and I'm going to darken up the pupil, but I'm not going to darken the area that I just did that reflective guideline on. I'm just going to darken the pupil. I've left a little bit of that area there. I've left that white. So taking a closer look at the eye, you'll notice that there is another circle around it, and that's the actual eyeball. So let's try and get that in place now. And it goes around the edge of the eye, and it's going to be darker at the exterior edge of the eye, and on the outer edge of the eye, it'll be nice and dark. That's probably one of the darkest parts of our eagle. Be dark around there, and then it's quite dark underneath that eye. Now the reason it's so dark there, this area here, is because this part of the eagle, it's got this very heavy brow here, and it's got a name. That's called a supraorbital ridge. So it's like a brow, and that gives the eagle such a fierce and Sam the Eagle appearance to him. He looks so wise and so authoritarian. Maybe that's why the Americans have chosen it because it's such a regal and noble looking creature. So we've got that very dark area. We can tell by the way the light is hitting it that this is a ridge, that it bumps out towards us, because underneath it is quite dark. It's casting a dark shadow. So let's keep that in mind as we're doing our eye here. There's a little mark here that goes, or a little bit of an edge of that brow that comes over the eye here. And we're starting to get a sense of our eagle's personality, aren't we? And it's darker in here around the edge of that eyeball. And then as we move into the inside of the eyeball, it gets a little bit lighter. It's not as dark. And see how I'm using the side of my pencil here? I'm now doing a shading. I'm getting a little bit lighter as I move in. Again, I'm going to avoid that spot that I set aside for the reflection. I don't want to put any graphite down on that. I'm going to get a little bit closer. There we go. I think you can see that. Okay, I want to just keep shading here very, very lightly. I don't want it to be too dark. And if I put too much down, if I put too much graphite down, I can either remove some with an eraser, or I can darken up the area that I've already laid down, make it it's a little bit darker by contrast. So we've got some character in our eagle's face here. We'll notice we have that little bit of a eye drop shape here, a bit of an almond shape here. Is that the eye duct? The tear duct is in here. And then we've got that ridge that comes over the top. So there, our eye is pretty much in place here. I'm pretty happy with that. I hope you guys are too. When we do our weekly sessions, like right now we're working on a program called When We Wake, and we're talking about hibernating animals. This one, as I mentioned, that we're previewing here is Raptors Amongst Us. So when we have our 1 hour sessions, we spend a fair bit of time talking about the tonality and the usefulness of the pencil and how to use different techniques. So it's quite detailed, and we get into a lot of very precise detail. But we'll notice that we tend to always start with the eye of our creature, just to get us to sort of understand the personality of it. So let's go back to our shapes here. I want to take a look at what's happening with the shapes. We've got our eye in here, and we've got our beak in here. Let's go in and fill in the area around the head of our eagle. You'll notice that the bald head, the piebald head, pretty much fits all inside the oval that I've laid over top, but it starts to fall outside of our composite shape over in this spot here. And this area here, this is like negative space in here. It's positive space because there's eagle here, but it's outside where our composite shapes are. So let's take a look at that. We've got starting at about this area on our oval, it starts to fall down to the corner of that rectangle. So I purposely laid the rectangle here, knowing that that is where we've got a patch of eagle that fills in between the two composite shapes. So let's try and capture that shape. I'm going to say it starts right about here. this is an opportunity to start adding a little bit of texture to our creature. He's got a furry, or not furry, he's got a feathery head. So I'm going to go down here. I know that I'm starting about here, and I'm going to end right about here. So we want to add this line here. And I'm going to give it kind of a slightly rougher edge with my pencil, some up and down lines, because I know that the feathers go there. And we know from our composite shapes that the feathers carry all the way down to his shoulder. All the way down in here. I'm just giving it a little bit of texture with the edge of my pencil. So we've got now the back of his neck filled in. We've got the top of his head filled in, even though it is still our composite shape, but that it clings very closely to the actual eagle, as you see. And we've got the beak. Now let's go underneath here. Let's fill in the rest of our eagle down. We're going to go down his neck and get a little bit of his wing and back, the areas that are present in our reference image. Okay, so now I want to take a look at right under his chin here. You can see, we can start to see some feathers emerging from underneath that lower mandible right here. So I'm going to start, I think that starts right about here. And again, I'm just going to use the tip of my pencil, and I'm doing some very light lines, just some very light lines with my pencil. Now when you're drawing feathers or fur or human hair or scales or anything that's got a texture to it, it's really important that you use your pencil, use it in the same direction as the growth of whatever it is that you're drawing. So in this case, we're looking at feathers. I want to keep that pencil going in the same direction as I believe that feather growth is going. I think I'm pretty accurate in determining that the feathers go this way. So now we go down here. I've gone to the tip of my box here, and look how there's now this lovely gentle curve that comes down off the side of our box. So there's the left side of our rectangle, and we've got this nice line here. And here's an area here we can consider sort of negative space here too. Where does the eagle reside outside of the box? Now there's a space right there we can even look at. So I want to recreate this space on my sketch pad. So I think it's going to be approximately like this, approximately. And it doesn't have to be exact, everybody. There's no making sure that you're getting it precisely. You want to do your best. Okay, so there is what I think is the approximate appearance, approximate length of that neck. And then we have, it goes a little bit further down, we've got mostly white feathers. We can actually start drawing in the differentiation between the white and the brown feathers here. I'm going to move my book just slightly so you can see what I'm doing. But there's kind of a fringe down here, a fringe of white feathers as it overlaps the brown feathers. And they're pretty distinct. So I'm just taking a look at that. And I know that those white feathers pretty much all reside within the boundaries of my rectangle. So here's an opportunity just to do some nice light lines with your pencil. Now you don't need to get them exactly right, like each feather exactly in the right spot. Not by any means. You want to just give the appearance of being feathers. And the appearance of feathers in this case is sort of with chevron-shaped lines. And then it goes up over the shoulder. There you see there's no white on the shoulder area of our eagle. There's no white over here, just a little glimpse of brown coming through. And then the white comes over the edge here. And then we see over on this side of our shoulder, I'm going to pull up a little bit. On this side of our eagle, this is where we have brown feathers. And I can see that his back or her back extends a little bit further beyond this area here. So we've now got our very basic shape of our eagle in place. And I think we can go ahead and erase our composite lines now. So if you have your eraser handy, please feel free to grab that and start erasing some of these lines. Again, I hope you haven't pressed too hard, but if you have, live and learn, you'll know for next time. So I'm going to erase some of these lines. We won't need this one anymore. And once it's kind of a little bit of magic, you erase these lines and suddenly it's like, oh, this guy is really starting to look like the creature I wanted it to look like. So you can see that the use of shapes, the shapes relative to one another, that's why they're called composite, because they compose the shape, is really quite handy. So for areas where it's quite tight, I tend to use a smaller eraser, one like this. It's quite handy. It's not as good as the big erasers. You don't get quite the same result, but it is better than erasing everything you've just drawn by accident. Now you may be able to see some of your composite lines shining through, which is actually fine, because in some cases you may find being able to see a little bit of your composite line is kind of useful. So filling in the rest of our beak, for example, you might think that's kind of nice to know exactly where that composite line was. I'm just going to sharpen my pencil here. When you're using the tip of your pencil a fair bit, you need to sharpen it quite frequently. If you're doing a lot of shading, like this way, you're actually self-sharpening your pencil. So in this case, I've been using the tip of my pencil. I just needed to give it a bit of a sharpen. Okay, I'm going to go back and look at that beak again. I want to get the lip line, if we can call it that, the mandible line where the two halves of the beak, the top part of the beak meets the lower part, and we've got that line that curves through here, and it takes it right through. There's a line that takes us right through to underneath the eye. So that's quite a lengthy line here. It's quite wavy. You can actually just sort of run over it a little bit with your pencil and get a sense of the wave of that line. It's not a straight line by any means. It's a wavy line. So I'm going to try that over here, and I know that line starts right about here. That is something we could have waited to draw in before we got rid of our composite lines, but it's whatever your comfort level is. I know now that the end of that mouth, look at that right here, it's underneath the pupil, so we know it goes as far as here. Now if you didn't have the composite shapes, you might have thought that the beak actually ended over here somewhere, or that the lip line ended over here, but in fact this is helping us to understand that in fact it actually goes quite deep. It goes quite deep into the eagle's head. I'm going to try and get the approximate line here. That's pretty close, pretty close. So I've drawn a very basic line here for that, the separation between the mandibles. And then I'm drawing a little bit of a curve here to create that point. That is really quite a sharp point. I'm going to make that a little tighter by erasing some of my excess lines here. And he's really starting to take shape. I hope you're feeling the same way about yours. Get rid of some of these lines. I use a painter's brush, a 1-inch painter's brush, to help me get rid of the eraser crumbs. It's really handy. Otherwise, if you're just using your hand, you get graphite in the bottom of your hand. It's quite grubby. But this way, it's nice and tidy. So getting rid of some of these just to make way for my actual line. So I've got my mandible line in here, and we've got our nair that we did in earlier. Now taking a closer look at the nair and the beak, there's an interesting thing going on in here. And the beak is made up of a very, very hard calcified surface. So you'll notice that there's kind of a line that goes up here. It's almost like a joint or a seam. It goes straight up and down, then it curves off to underneath the nair, and then curves up over top of the beak here. It's like two separate parts of the beak here, almost like two separate bones. So let's see if we can get that in shape. So that line here, it falls underneath the nair slightly to the right. It's not right underneath, it's slightly to the right. So I'm going to go up here just a little bit, just not pressing too hard. Then I know that it's going to go up to this area because I can see that from my reference image, and then I'm going to curl it down here. You notice I do a fair bit of that. I know where a line is going to start, and I know where it's going to end. So I'll tend to give myself little markers, point A, point B, and then I'll try and figure out what the shape is in between. So then from that line close to the nair here, it curves up and over the beak. And you can see the beak is very curved there. So we've got that little bit of a line here. I'm sure it's got a name. I'm not sure what it is. I've got a little bit of a line here. And notice how the beak goes back about, goes just to above the nair here. That's where it kind of meets up with the feathers of our bird. What we can do now is I would like to go in and the top of his head, that piebald top of his head, let's give it a little bit of texture with the tip of our pencil. We know that it's feathers. It's not completely smooth. It's not smooth like an egg. Just add a little bit of texture here. Just some jaunty lines. You just don't want a hard straight line because that does not really represent the bald eagle. Okay, so we've got some nice shapes going on in here. Let's take a closer look at right under the mandible here. We've got that line comes down here, and then it melds away into feathers. And then we've got, let's see now, I'm just going over it in my mind here. We have the lower part of that mandible. I've made this line here a little bit too heavy. It's actually quite thin. If you take a closer look at your reference image, you'll see that right at this juncture here, you can hardly even see the mandible line. You can hardly even see it. So I want to make that a little less precise on mine, a little less standoutish in mine. I want to get rid of this area here. I'm going to use my bigger eraser. And it's a little bit lighter here. Hardly anything is noticed here. Maybe it's still a little bit too. There we go. Okay, and I'm just getting rid of some final composite lines. I can still see a few of them. Another area we want to cover off on is this area around where the beak meets the feathers on the eye side. So right down here, there's this area here where it says kind of pointy feathers. It's a bit like you would see on your cat or your dog. The feathers or fur in the case of your pet they're really short, and they kind of stand out a little bit like almost like little tiny spikes. So this area here is kind of a patch that we want to incorporate, and with our texture we can learn how to make that appear like it's the real thing. So this is a little patch here. I want to move down here and sort of block off that area where that patch, and I'm just doing a little bit of jaggedy, some light jaggedy lines here. I'm going to get a little tighter for you to see. A little tighter here. So we've got our basic lines in here. I'm feeling pretty good about that. So let's now start looking at what we call value. Now, when I talk about values, I'm talking about the very, very dark parts of our image versus the very, very light parts of our image. So if you were to look at your eagle and kind of squint at it, give it a squint and decide to yourself, like, where's the very darkest part of my eagle? So I'm doing that right now, and I think the very darkest part is the pupil and the area right under that supraorbital ridge that I mentioned, and then around the eye. Another really dark part is this nair, the nostril. And some other dark parts are down here. Now the reason these are so dark is not because the feathers are dark, but because there's no light shining on them. So the shoulder is definitely dark, but that's because the feathers are brown. They're dark, and they're pigmented dark. But this area here, like underneath the chin, it's also dark. It's not as dark, but it is almost as dark as these areas here. So let's go in with our pencils, and we're going to mark off the really darkest areas. So I want to take a look at that nair, that nostril. I'm going to shade it in with the side of my pencil and try and get it. Sometimes you have to use the tip of your pencil if it's a really small area. In fact, I think I will use, because it's such a small little bit of real estate here. I'm going to just use the tip of my pencil to make that nice and dark, and we want it to be as dark as the pupil. You notice that nair is pretty much as dark as the pupil. If you were to compare the two values, really nice and dark, and then you'll see that there's a little bit of a line. I'm going to get a little bit tighter. There's a little bit of a line that goes around that nair. Tells us there's a little bit of a ridge. And then there's a little bit of a line over here too, where there's a ridge that stands up, and it remains a little bit lighter. So there we have our nair. Taking a look at the eye, we have that area underneath the supraorbital ridge, which is nice and dark. There's also an area, I'm going to remove a little bit of the mark that I just put down. Remove a little bit of that. There's also a part just over the eyelid that's a little bit lighter. As it comes down here, you'll see there's a little bit of the eyelid that's a little bit lighter. And that's because, like our eyelid, it's a bit of a ridge, and it sticks out a little bit, so that's why it appears lighter. So we have a very dark area right underneath the ridge. And it carries over on this side. And then around the eye, we have another little bit of a ridge. And we know it's a ridge because of the way the light is hitting it. We can tell that this area here, that the lighter area stands up a bit higher, stands up a little bit higher. So we've got some a lighter area here, and then it gets a little bit darker as it goes towards. And I'm going to use my finger to do a little bit of blurring. I'm just going to pull that graphite away from the eye, and we're starting to get some nice shading going in here. So I've got a little bit of darkness underneath his eye here. I'm shading with my pencil. a little bit of shading, and I'm using the side of my pencil. It's almost lying flat on the page, almost. So I've put down a little bit of graphite, and I'm just going to pull away at that a little bit. Give it a little bit of a blur. That starts to give it a nice smooth look. And this whole area in here, I mentioned it before, I'm sure it's got a name, but I can't recall what it is. This area here is that there's sort of short, spiky little feathers that reside in this area. I'm going to shade this area with my pencil, and I'm going to blur it a little bit with my finger. You could also use those little sticks. I think they're called tortillons. Some of my students like to use the tortillon. So I'm blurring this area a bit here, and now I've created that lovely surface, a nice surface. And I'm going to get in even a little bit tighter and hope you can see what I'm doing here. So I've created that kind of a graphite surface, and I'm now going to go in with the tip of my pencil, and I'm going to dab at it. I'm going to do a little bit of this tiny little strokes. Or even pointing, you can even do what we call pointillism, dabbing at it with your pencil. And you're creating some nice appearance here. You don't have to get each dot exactly right, but you can certainly create the appearance of some different textures going on in that area. So that's really a cool technique. So that is around the eye. I'm quite happy with that. Let's take a closer look at the beak. Now the beak is that really hard, calciferous kind of a shell, and it's you know to touch it. It's hard, and it's probably very smooth. So I'm going to get it nice and close, and using the side of my pencil, I'm going to go in and get the darkest areas first. So I think the darkest areas are here, in this area, underneath, and then it's really dark right here where it lies underneath the upper beak. So I'm darkening that area. And as we go towards the eagle itself, it gets a little bit lighter, a little bit lighter. And then I'm going to do some shading on the top of his shell. Now, on his beak. Now I want you to take a close look at this. So here is the reference image. Notice that there is a light line around that tip of the beak, and it goes right up over the edge. That's a little bit of what we call backlighting. So we can see that the light is landing on top of the beak, and it's sort of curving around it a bit. It's curving around. So I want you to keep that in mind as you're shading. We want to try to keep that little bit of light. Want to keep a little line of light. So what you can do is we can actually draw a little guide for yourself ahead of time. Let's draw a little bit of a guide, and I'm just going to draw it really, really lightly. I'm going to draw a little line here, and the area that I'm blocking off is going to stay the color of my sketchbook. See what I'm doing there? I'm leaving that area is set aside, and then it goes right down to the tip too. We're going to go right down to the tip and then right up the side of our beak. And now the white area that's reflected starts to get a little bit more, a little bit broader. We're starting to see more white as we go up the tip of that beak. But let's keep concentrating on the very lower edge here. And I'm now going to use the tip of my pencils to start shading. Again, mostly because it's a really tight area. And I just want to do that. I want to show you what I mean by blocking off a little bit of an area, a bit of a gutter that we want to stay light. And it can really be a wonderful result, and I hope that makes you happy, because that certainly does me. So I'm darkening this area. I want to start off with kind of an equal level gradient or equal amount of graphite, not too much. And I'm just darkening that a little bit. I'm going to use my finger just to smudge a little bit, but I do not want to smudge the area that I've left white there. I'm going to try and pull away from the area that I've got here. And that makes a nice, it helps create the appearance of smoothness, doesn't it? So I've tried to leave that area white, and I think I've done okay. And then it goes a little bit darker up, just as the white is turning into dark, it gets a tiny bit darker, just ever so briefly, and then it turns to that very neutral, that very middle of the road tonal value here. So we're going to shade in this area here. Taking a look at the rest of that beak, you can see there are some lines. There are some lines as the beak has, to show the lines that have grown on the beak. You can use the tip of your pencil now to create some of those lines. And I'm going to go in and I'm going to erase some of the very, very edges of those first lines I drew. Don't quite need them anymore. And right down here, right on the edge of my beak, I'm going to erase some of those. Even on the very top, that line is a little bit thicker than we needed. Let's erase, get rid of some of those crumbs and see how it's looking. Yeah, it looks pretty nice. Looks pretty good. So we only have another 10 minutes. I would like to concentrate on getting the area around the eye. I'm going to back up a bit here so you can see. We've done really the trickiest parts of our eagle. I'm going to say the eye and the beak area and trying to get the shading of that beak in. And even under our beak here, there's a little bit more we wanted to do. So I wanted to look at the eagle and look at where the darkest parts of our eagle reside on his white feathers. So we've got this area down here. It's quite dark down here, and I'm just using a really light shading with my pencil. And again, just like we did with the beak, you'll notice on this left-hand side of our form, of our shape, it's quite white because there's light curving around our eagle. So try to keep that area right over here. Try to keep that white if you can. It's a big ask, I know, it's tricky. But it's something you could keep in mind for when you're working on it, when you're working on other animals as well or other creatures. Okay, so I'm just putting down a little bit of graphite. I'm going to smudge some with my finger. I like to do that either with my finger or with a tortillon because it puts a nice kind of base layer down, a base layer, and then I'm going to go in with my pencil and start drawing some of the more details, like get some more detailed feathers and whatnot in here. Underneath my mandible here, I have a little bit of a darker line, a more distinct line that I'm using the tip of my pencil for. And then I notice around here, around my lip, if eagles have lips, I think they do. I'm going to go in around here. Just give that another line, another outline here, because there is a little bit more to it than I had initially included. Now he's starting to look a bit more real. So I'm going to have got that initial blocked in area for the darker parts of his feathers. And they're darker because of the sun or the lack of light, not because he has any dark feathers here. There's even that kind of a ridge that goes in here that helps accentuate his kind of fierce look. A little bit darker directly under the eye there. You can add a little bit more with your pencil. And again, I'm using the side of my pencil. See how I'm just shading with it? I'm not using the tip at this point. And then I'm going to go out here, smooth that out a bit. You can use your finger if you like. Got some nice dark areas happening here. And there's even some patches of dark here. And notice how I'm trying to go in the direction of the feather growth. I'm not going side to side or this way. I'm trying to go in the direction that the feathers actually roll down our eagle's head. And I'm just getting some very basic lines down. And now if you put too many down, you can always go in and erase some. The top of the head has a couple of distinct shadows on it, not too many. Most of the top of the head is light, so we'll leave most of that to remain the same color as your sketchbook page. And if you put too many down, go in with your eraser and just lift a few off. The eraser and the pencil make a wonderful dance team. Okay, so I've laid down some basic shading, like a kind of base levels, foundation if you like, of shading here. So let's take a look at some of the feather action that goes underneath the chin here. Actually go a little tighter here, I went too far back. So under the chin here, we can see that there are some short feathers, just short ones, coming down, and look at the direction that they're flowing. They're flowing, it's almost like the direction that if water were flowing down his neck, it would be flowing in that direction. So we want to get, just using the tip of our pencil, I'm just going to do some very little tight lines, and it creates the appearance of feathers, or of texture. Not so much of feathers necessarily, but of texture. We know that they are feathers because it's an eagle we're doing. And at this point, if you were just to look at that neck, you didn't see any other part of the creature, you might not know that it was a bird, because this part of him is not, they're not distinctly feathers, this part of his anatomy. And I'm going in the direction of that feather growth. So we've got a little bit more detail here. On the side of his head, we've got that nice, oh, I think I've gone a little bit too deep on my, I want to get a little bit of that ridge a little lower. You'll notice things if you get up and go to the refrigerator and come back, you'll notice things that you've done before that you don't notice when you're working on it. So I just realized my orbital ridge was a little bit too high. So I'm tightening that up right now. It goes a little bit lower. So some of the feathers around the side of his head go in these directions. Let's go in that direction. And I'm just using the tip of my pencil. I'm not pressing super hard though, just lightly. Around the eye, we have some feathers that are coming off, the very, very short feathers here, coming off the side of his eye. What we can do, while we still have a few minutes left, is I'm going to go in and try to put a few base layers down for the shoulder here, because that is where it's the darkest. And it's the darkest because it's the pigmentation. So let's lay it a little bit down in here, trying to go in the direction of the fur, of the feather growth. And we're going to lay a fair bit down because it's quite dark. The only areas where it's light is where the feathers are differentiated one from another. So we can remove some of those, but they're not going to be as light as your sketchbook page. And then we have some darkness coming down between the feather jagged edges that we drew earlier. You can start adding those in too. And again, you don't have to have those positioned in exactly the right spot. It's really more about creating that appearance. So we've got this area here. And now let's look at the even darker areas of our shoulder and the brown feathers. The very darkest area of brown is going to be in this area here, just where the shoulder meets up with the neck here. This area in here. It's quite dark in here. So I'm still using this side of my pencil, just laying down a bit more. And it goes, some of it feathers right up into curls right up into the white feathers. You can see that there's, where the white feathers overlay the brown ones, there is definitely some overlap. And again, you can make that part up, but as long as you're going in the direction of the feather growth, it's absolutely fine. I'm going to start looking at these feathers that come over the shoulder edge. Some of them are darker, and you have those lighter edges of the feathers here. You can start incorporating those now if you like. This is definitely tricky. Just think about how the tiles on a roof or the shingles on a turtle might look. One overlaps another. You can go in and start adding a little more detail here. Make it a little bit darker. And again, you do not have to have them exactly as they appear in your reference image. It's more about creating the appearance of texture. I'm going to continue to draw little lines that sort of curl up into the white area, gives it an appearance of reality. We have just a few more minutes. I'm going to carry on with my drawing, and I will be happy to stay a little bit longer if anyone wants to keep on watching me. I hope you do. I will stay on for another 10 minutes or so, but I'm going to be carrying on with the darkening of my eagle. I'm going to pull up a little bit here so you can see what I've got so far. I'm going to carry on with creating the tonal differences between the white feathers and the brown feathers and the shadows within the white feathers. That is really where once you get the shape, and getting your foundational shape is really so critical, but once you have that, the rest is kind of like icing. So you spend your time, you're not in a hurry to do it, at least I hope you're not in a hurry. If you spend some quality time just going over your creature and deciding, is this as dark as it should be? Is this as light as it should be? There's something called a value bar that you could certainly look into if you're not able to join one of our classes. Oh, that's one thing I should mention, is the code for our upcoming classes is Bald Eagle. So if you were to go to batemanfoundation.org, there's a learning section, and you type in Bald Eagle as your code. We will have that going for the next 3 or 4 days, and you can get a slight discount on the upcoming session, Raptors Amongst Us, and that begins at the end of the month. If you sign up, we'll be sending you details, Zoom invitations, and study sheets to help you prepare for classes. So thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your time. And we run the Bateman Gallery NatureSketch and Wellness programs and partner with lots of art and native literacy initiatives, and we hope that we can promote these connections to the natural world. So thank you so much for your support and passion. And all proceeds from purchases to NatureSketch programs go to running more NatureSketch programs, and keeps our lights on. So thank you, everybody, and I hope that you have a wonderful summer. And if I don't see you in one of my classes, we will see you in the fall when we'll probably be running these workshops again. And I'm going to carry on for a little bit longer, as I mentioned, if you'd like to keep on watching. Thanks, everyone.